Hello artists and welcome to day 72 of the Epic Journey. I'm DaleneFM and today we're going to be talking a little bit about brushwork. The reason I want to talk about brushwork today is because, as you know, last week and for a little bit of the week before, we've concentrated quite a lot on Renaissance style painting, where everything had to be super fine, super smooth. But now we're going to move on to something a little bit more exciting, a little bit more impressionistic. So I want to go through some ways that you would use your brush to create a more impressionistic look and feel. Now, over the next few days, I was thinking maybe what we should do is go through some of the principles associated with impressionistic painting and then do an impressionistic work with you on camera like I did with the classical painting. So for a couple of days we'll go through some principles, and then for a few days after that we'll go through an actual painting again. So I'm going to move the camera overhead and we'll start working on some brushwork. What I've got here in front of me is just a canvas that I used to do a demo for one of the previous videos. I'm just reusing it because it has no particular use. I'm finished with it now. So I'm just going to be painting over it for this particular demo. And I've laid out on my palette a blob of very dark blue and a blob of white. Now that blue paint is actually paint that I had sitting in the fridge from a previous mix, so I'm not really sure what's in it. But what I'm doing now is I'm just giving you a control test. There's no oil in that paint. I'm painting it really dry. I'm using two different brushes. What I'm trying to show you there is how much pressure I kind of need to put on that canvas to get that smooth texture that I'm trying to create. The point of this video is that blending doesn't always have to happen like this. So this is our control test where I'm showing you the difference between an impressionistic type blending and the sort of more accurate, if you want to call it, blending, and the beautiful effects that you can create by not being so accurate, by allowing your brush strokes to talk. But to do that, I've got to thin the paint down a little bit. It's not necessary to work with dry paint. In fact, the more moist your paint is to a point, the better. Dry paint is not always a really nice consistency to work with when you're trying to get brush strokes to show and trying to create a loose, more impressionistic work. So you want your paint to be sort of toothpaste consistency. And I'm hoping that shows in the video. It's possibly not quite as oily in real life as what it might appear there. I think there's quite a lot of shine coming off the oil, so it makes it look a lot more oily. But it's not really. Now, of course, if you've watched previous videos, you will know that I don't actually really mix my whites with oil to paint when I'm actually doing a painting. I'll mix my titanium white with a bit of zinc white, and it might need a little bit of oil to soften it further, but zinc white's nice and soft, so I use zinc white almost as my medium for titanium white. This is titanium white I'm using here, so it needs a considerable amount of oil to soften it. But this is just for demo purposes, so I'm not being terribly pedantic. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a couple of different ways of blending that don't involve really fine, even, smooth blends. So now I'm just putting on a patch of white. And I'm working with two different brushes just so that I don't get too much contamination. And a patch of blue. Now I haven't ground the paint into the canvas, it's actually just placed on top, so there's a light pressure. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on the brush like what I would have to if the paint was more dry. So it's a light pressure because the paint is softer. It doesn't need as much grinding as what it does when it's dry. But what you'll see there, because the paint is so much softer, I'm actually having a little bit of difficulty creating that smooth blend that I did when the paint was more dry. So what I'm going to show you now is an alternative. With softer paint you can actually get a lot of really nice effects for a more sort of loose, impressionistic type of blending. Now this is just using little brush strokes, short strokes at random, wiping off the excess of blue because it's maybe going a little bit too far. And now again on this one, I'm going to use some random brush strokes, and then I'm not going to smooth them out. I'm going to leave those brush strokes there, because what I want to show you is the lovely effects that you can get with your brush strokes actually doing the talking. Again, brush strokes at random. What's really nice about impressionistic work is to allow your brush strokes to stay on the canvas and to be quite spontaneous almost, and to vary your brush stroke direction as well as possibly the brush that you're using, so that you don't get this even smooth finish. Now notice how little I blended that one. There was almost no blending going from left to right there. I'm going to do a similar thing here. Now you also notice sometimes I work my brush almost in a figure of 8. Now that's just maybe my style, but I find it very useful. It's a nice little trick to use, kind of using both sides of the brush. See, there's my little figure of 8 going on there. And to me, this is one of my favorite ways of blending, because it just creates a soft blend but allows you to keep your brush strokes. Now what I'm going to show you now is another way not to do it. Okay, if you noticed until now, what I've done is blue on the left, white on the right, and I'd blend from left to right, but my brush strokes, particularly in the smooth tones, were vertical from top to bottom. Now I'm blending from top to bottom, and my brush strokes are top to bottom, and I want to show you how almost impossible it is to get a nice effective blend doing it this way. And it's something that I don't recommend unless you're doing animal fur, because with animal fur it's quite important to paint in the direction of the hair growth, and then something like this would be very useful. I certainly don't recommend this for when you're trying to create a blend that's got dynamic qualities to it, because it actually turns out to be a little bit flat. Now when you're blending work, of course the pressure on your brush is quite important, and if you've got soft paint, like I mentioned, a light touch is really, really useful. But it will take a little bit of practice to get the pressure on your brush right, especially if you're used to painting with a bit of pressure and slightly dry paint. It does take a little bit of practice then to get the pressure on the brush right, so that the tips of your brush is just touching the canvas almost, and you're allowing the brush to drag paint rather than just squish it into the canvas, and it becomes really, really nice and effective. Now what I'm doing here is just playing the fool, because I've got a whole lot of paint left and a canvas that I have no idea what I'm going to do with. So I'm just playing the fool now and just creating a background. I might use this canvas for something in the future. I suppose this is a good demonstration of how random and almost instinctive brush strokes can become a texture that you can use to really beef up and give your impressionistic painting quite a lot of interest to it, because it's the brush strokes that become the point of interest. I think what you need to remember more than anything else with impressionistic work is that the name says it all. You're creating an impression. You're creating an impression of that particular object that you're painting, or the scene that you're painting, or the person that you're painting. It's not about replicating it perfectly. It's about creating your emotional impression of that particular scene or person or figure or whatever it is that you're painting. Brushstrokes become the communication method that you use to describe an inner emotion. The loose instinctive variation of brushstrokes that you use become your language that you use to communicate something that is quite non-verbal, and an emotional response or impression of what it is that you're painting. Now you'll also see that I'm working quite quickly, that also just comes with practice. At first you might find that it's quite difficult, because it might not be something that you're used to, but eventually you will learn to handle the paint. The feeling of the paint underneath your brush will become quite instinctive, and then your work will speed up. I think the most useful thing that I can tell you about this kind of impressionistic work is that the brush must have a light touch. And you must almost just allow it to flow without thinking about it too much. So artists, this is what it ended up with. I ended up just smooshing it all around and blending it all together. Now, I think this could probably make a really nice base for a seascape or a skyscape or something. But at the moment, it's literally just a covering on a canvas. I've just been messing around with brush strokes, as you know. So I have no idea what I'm going to do with this. So we'll put it aside for the moment. Artists, I hope you've learned something from this brushwork tutorial, and I will see you again tomorrow in day 73. Have a great day. Bye. That's what you want to do.